In our last video, we saw the CIA's perfect playbook for regime change shatter on the beaches of the Bay of Pigs. The agency's humiliating failure to overthrow Fidel Castro didn't just embarrass the United States, it sent a shockwave across the globe directly to Moscow. Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev saw President Kennedy as weak and indecisive, and Fidel Castro was convinced another American invasion was imminent. This toxic combination of perceived weakness and genuine fear set the stage for the most dangerous 13 days in human history. This is the story of the Cuban Missile Crisis. But we're not just going to retell the familiar story of political brinkmanship. Using Tim Weiner's legacy of ashes and declassified intelligence records, we are going to expose the secret intelligence war behind the crisis. This is the story of how the CIA, reeling from its greatest failure, was plunged into its greatest test. A high-stakes spy game where one wrong move could have triggered a nuclear holocaust. It's a story of colossal intelligence failure, but also of how intelligence, in the end, helped pull the world back from the abyss. By the end of this video, you'll understand that the Cuban Missile Crisis wasn't just a standoff between two leaders. It was a desperate intelligence battle fought by spies, analysts, and U-2 pilots in the skies above a nuclear-armed island. If you believe that understanding these hidden strategies is key to understanding our world, then like this video, subscribe to Strategy Codex, and join the conversation in the comments below. In the aftermath of the Bay of Pigs, the CIA was in disgrace. President Kennedy had fired its legendary director Allen Dulles and his deputy, Richard Bissell. The new director of Central Intelligence was a conservative Republican businessman named John McCone. McCone was an outsider, and he was the only person in Washington who saw the coming storm. As early as August 1962, 4 months after the Bay of Pigs, McCone began to voice a terrifying prediction. He told President Kennedy and his brother, Attorney General Robert Kennedy, that the Soviets were going to do the unthinkable: place offensive nuclear missiles in Cuba. As he told them, "If I were Khrushchev, I'd put offensive missiles in Cuba. Then I'd bang my shoe on the desk and say to the United States, 'How do you like looking down the end of a gun barrel for a change?'" No one believed him. The CIA's own top analysts, the so-called experts, unanimously agreed it was impossible. In a now infamous Special National Intelligence Estimate on September 19, 1962, the agency formally concluded that placing nuclear missiles in Cuba would be incompatible with Soviet policy. They were mirror imaging, assuming the Soviets would never take a risk that they themselves would not take. They were 180 degrees wrong. While McCone was sounding the alarm, the Kennedy administration was focused on something else: revenge. Robert Kennedy, in particular, was obsessed with getting rid of Castro. He personally oversaw a new, massive covert operation codenamed Operation Mongoose. Its goal was simple: to wreak havoc in Cuba and overthrow the Castro regime. RFK demanded massive activity from the CIA. He wanted more sabotage, more spies, more dirty tricks. On August 21, 1962, he even asked McCone if the CIA could stage a phony attack on the American base at Guantanamo Bay to create a pretext for a full-scale U.S. invasion. The pressure was for action, not analysis. Intelligence took a backseat to aggression. This obsession with covert action had a disastrous side effect. After a CIA U-2 spy plane was shot down over China in September, the White House became terrified of another embarrassing incident. They severely restricted U-2 flights over western Cuba, the very area where the missiles were being installed. This created a 45-day photo gap, a blind spot at the most critical moment. While the CIA was blind, 99 Soviet nuclear warheads, each one 70 times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima, arrived in Cuba undetected. Finally, on October 4th, McCone, furious about the flight ban, convinced the White House to approve one more U-2 flight. The intelligence that triggered the flight came not from a high-level source, but from a low-level Cuban agent, a road watcher who reported seeing convoys of mysterious, canvas-covered cargo the size of telephone poles moving through the countryside. On October 14, 1962, a U-2 piloted by Major Richard Heiser flew over the San Cristobal region of Cuba. The film was rushed back to Washington when the analysts at the National Photographic Interpretation Center bent over their light tables. Their worst fears were realized. The photos showed clear evidence of launch pads, missile transporters, and bunkers for medium-range ballistic missiles. McCone had been right. The CIA's experts had been wrong. The United States was facing what the President's Foreign Intelligence Board would later call a near-total intelligence surprise. The discovery triggered the 13 days. President Kennedy immediately convened a secret group of his top advisors, known as ex-com, to manage the crisis. The pressure on the CIA was immense. They had failed to predict the deployment. Now they had to provide perfect real-time intelligence on it. How many missiles were there? Were they operational? Were the nuclear warheads on site? The fate of the world depended on the answers. The agency threw everything it had at the problem. U-2S flew constant perilous missions over the island. On October 27th, at the height of the crisis, a U-2 was shot down by a Soviet SA-2 missile, killing its pilot, Major Rudolf Anderson. The incident nearly triggered a retaliatory U.S. airstrike, which could have escalated into all-out nuclear war. Kennedy held back. At the same time, the CIA was desperately trying to get human intelligence from the ground. They activated their remaining networks in Cuba, and Operation Mongoose, which had been focused on sabotage, was now repurposed to gather intelligence on the missile sites. While the spies and pilots worked in the shadows, the politicians engaged in a tense public standoff. On October 22nd, Kennedy went on television and announced a naval quarantine around Cuba to block any more Soviet ships from arriving.
Good evening, my fellow citizens. This government, as promised, has maintained the closest surveillance of the Soviet military buildup on the island of Cuba. Within the past week, unmistakable evidence has established the fact that a series of offensive missile sites is now in preparation on that imprisoned island. The purpose of these bases can be none other than to provide a nuclear strike capability against the Western Hemisphere. I have directed that the following initial steps be taken immediately. First, to halt this offensive buildup, a strict quarantine on all offensive military equipment under shipment to Cuba is being initiated. All ships of any kind bound for Cuba, from whatever nation or port, where they're found to contain cargoes of offensive weapons, be turned back. This quarantine will be extended, if needed, to other types of cargo and carriers. We are not at this time, however, denying the necessities of life, as the Soviets attempted to do in their Berlin blockade of 1948. Second, I have directed the continued and increased close surveillance of Cuba and its military buildup. The foreign ministers of the OAS, in their communique of October 6, rejected secrecy on such matters in this hemisphere. Should these offensive military preparations continue, thus increasing the threat to the hemisphere, further action will be justified. I have directed the armed forces to prepare for any eventualities, and I trust that in the interest of both the Cuban people and the Soviet technicians at the sites, the hazards to all concerned of continuing this threat will be recognized. Third, it shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union. Fourth, as a necessary military precaution, I have reinforced our base at Guantanamo, evacuated today the dependents of our personnel there, and ordered additional military units to be on a standby alert basis. Finally, I want to say a few words to the captive people of Cuba, to whom this speech is being directly carried by special radio facilities. I speak to you as a friend, as one who knows of your deep attachment to your fatherland, as one who shares your aspirations for liberty and justice for all. And I have watched, and the American people have watched, with deep sorrow, how your nationalist revolution was betrayed and how your fatherland fell under foreign domination. Now your leaders are no longer Cuban leaders, inspired by Cuban ideals. They are puppets and agents of an international conspiracy which has turned Cuba against your friends and neighbors in the Americas and turned it into the first Latin American country to become a target for nuclear war, the first Latin American country to have these weapons on its soil. These new weapons are not in your interest. They contribute nothing to your peace and well-being. They can only undermine it. But this country has no wish to cause you to suffer or to impose any system upon you. We know that your lives and land are being used as pawns by those who deny your freedom. Many times in the past, the Cuban people have risen to throw out tyrants who destroyed their liberty. And I have no doubt that most Cubans today look forward to the time when they will be truly free, free from foreign domination, free to choose their own leaders, free to select their own system, free to own their own land, free to speak and write and worship without fear or degradation. And then shall Cuba be welcomed back to the society of free nations and to the associations of this hemisphere.
He demanded that Khrushchev remove the missiles. For 6 days, the world held its breath as Soviet ships steamed toward the quarantine line. It was the ultimate game of nuclear chicken. But behind the scenes, a secret back channel had been opened. Robert Kennedy began meeting secretly with the Soviet ambassador, Anatoly Dobrynin. This is where the public story and the secret history diverge. Publicly, the crisis ended when Khrushchev backed down in the face of American resolve. He agreed to remove the missiles in exchange for a public American pledge not to invade Cuba. It looked like a clear victory for Kennedy. But that wasn't the whole deal. As revealed in declassified documents years later, there was a secret component. Robert Kennedy offered Dobrynin a secret sweetener. The United States would remove its own Jupiter nuclear missiles from Turkey, which bordered the Soviet Union. These were obsolete missiles, but their removal was a significant concession. It was a trade, a quid pro quo, but it had to be kept absolutely secret. Kennedy made it clear that if the deal ever leaked, the offer was off the table. The Jupiter missiles were quietly removed a few months later. For decades, the world believed Kennedy had won through pure strength. The reality was a secret compromise brokered in the shadows. The Cuban Missile Crisis was the CIA's darkest hour, and paradoxically, one of its finest. The agency's analytical branch failed catastrophically in the months leading up to the crisis, blinded by political assumptions and a lack of imagination. But once the missiles were discovered, the agency's technical and human intelligence capabilities were crucial in providing President Kennedy with the information he needed to navigate the crisis without triggering a war. The U-2 photos gave him undeniable proof. The intelligence on the missile's status gave him time. It was a lesson learned in the hardest way possible, that in the nuclear age, good intelligence is the only thing that stands between diplomacy and Armageddon. What do you think? Was the secret missile trade a necessary compromise or a sign of weakness? And could a crisis like this happen today? Share your thoughts in the comments below. This crisis was the peak of Cold War tension, but the secret wars continued. If you want to see what happened next in the CIA's chronological history of covert operations, make sure you subscribe to Strategy Codex and hit the notification bell. In our next video, we'll travel to Chile, where the CIA would spend a decade trying to stop another elected socialist, Salvador Allende, culminating in a bloody coup in 1973. The playbook was about to be rewritten once again. Subscribe so you don't miss it.